So welcome everyone. Welcome to the third annual Connecticut OER Summit. My name is Kevin Corcoran. I'm the statewide coordinator for the Connecticut OER Coordinating Council. This is the organization that's sponsoring this week's event. We're joined today not only by our colleagues from Connecticut, but individuals from institutions from across the country. At last count, we had over 275 registered for this week. You all represent 80 different institutions across 22 different states, and we have a few early risers from Australia joining us this week as well. We have what we hope is an engaging and varied group of sessions scheduled for the next 4 days, all tied to the theme of equity and opportunity through open education. Our hope is that we can expand our collective understanding of the role that equity plays within the open movement and pass along valuable approaches and strategies that you can use to adapt or put to work at your own institution. On that note, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. As we get started with our keynote today, I'll ask everyone to remain muted and use the Q&A tool to submit your questions. You should see that in the right-hand panel. But let me get right into it. Let me briefly introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Shinta Hernandez. Dr. Hernandez is the founding dean of the virtual campus at Montgomery College in Montgomery County, Maryland. During her 14 years at the college, she has helped to advance the work in the areas of open educational resources and open pedagogy, social justice and equity, inclusive curriculum, faculty professional development, international collaborations, and online education. She currently serves on the leadership teams of the Montgomery College ATD Student Success Network, as well as for CCC OER, the Maryland Higher Ed Commission for, Faculty Advisory Council, and the Maryland Online Leadership Institute. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Hernandez. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for that warm introduction and for that, the welcome remarks. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. Thanks so much for having me in your virtual space in Connecticut. And again, for those of you who are out of the Connecticut, and welcome to this space. I'm so thrilled to be the keynote speaker at your third Connecticut OER Summit. And it's always fun for me and an honor to talk about open education and specifically social justice and open education. So I was happy to see that the theme of your summit is equity and opportunity, because that really adequately describes the evolution of the work that's happening at my institution at Montgomery College. So I want to share with you that this keynote is designed to be interactive. So there will be opportunities for you to chime in through some polling. I also want to share with you that my Twitter handle is written at the bottom right of the slide. It is at Prof Hernandez 2, as in the number 2. And so if any of you are on Twitter and if you're interested in tweeting this live, please go right ahead. And then to get yourself ready for the interactive component, I am going to ask that you visit the Mentimeter site. It is www.menti.com, and you'll use the code that's written also at the very top, 72308219. And so once you're in, the presentation slides should pop up on your device at this point, and it will advance as I advance the slides. Okay, now if you're unable to access the Mentimeter site to do the polling, that's perfectly okay. You can also provide your responses to my polls in the chat if you're comfortable doing that. All right. So let me first get started with doing something that is very true, near and dear to my heart, and very important because I think this is a moral and civic obligation for all of us, and that is to honor the original inhabitants of our land. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Piscataway people, traditional custodians of the land on which I reside here in Maryland. I also want to acknowledge and honor the sovereignty of the 5 tribal nations who inhabit the land on which you all gather in Connecticut. And then along with the rest of you who are tuning in from other states, please know that I acknowledge the original inhabitants of your land as well. So to give you a sense of what you'll hear this afternoon or this morning, again, depending on where you are. So let me give you a quick rundown of what I'm going to cover today. I want to get to know you. I want us to get to know each other through polling, and that's where the Mentimeter comes in. Then I want to share a little bit about my institution, Montgomery College, so that you have a sense of why we do this work and why this is so important for Montgomery College students and our communities. And then I'm going to talk about the urgency of moving toward the world of open by diving into the open pedagogy and open education framework. And I also want to talk about decolonization, so I'll discuss some of those principles. And then you'll also get to hear about some opportunities for advancing the open work at your institution, or in some cases, getting your feet wet at your institution with open education work. And then I can share some examples from Montgomery College, some of the things that we are doing and some of the things that we have been doing. All right, so here is our chance to get to know one another. So if you go to that Menti website, menti.com, and use the code 72308219, please go ahead and answer the question, what is your official role at your institution? All right. Okay. And like I said, if you are unable to get onto Menti or don't want to get onto Menti, that is okay. You can share your responses on the chat. And I see a couple of responses already there. Okay. All right, so we have a good number of librarians here, full-time faculty, deans or directors, other, senior administrators, instructional designers. All right. I think we are, okay, just a few more chiming in. Great, I think we're slowing down a little bit. Okay, terrific, thank you. And you can still continue chiming in even after I've advanced the slide. So most certainly get a chance to tell me what your official role is at your institution. All right, here's the next question for you. Which institution do you represent? This part's always fun for me because I get to see how, what are the variety of institutions across the country who are here. And this will pop up as a word cloud. All right. This is great. A lot of Northeast universities, New England universities and colleges. This is wonderful. Okay, I think we're slowing down here as well. Thank you for sharing. Very widespread. I appreciate this. Thank you. All right, next question for you. This helps me a lot because as I move along the presentation, I get to know what our degrees of knowledge is on the topic. So what is your level of knowledge on open education? Okay. All right, yeah. So far, quite an even mix between the basic and intermediate levels. Well, wherever you are on this spectrum of knowledge, you certainly have come to the right place. I am going to provide information for those who are in the non and basic level of knowledge and provide you with a framework and definitions. And then for those of you who are in the intermediate and advanced, some of those things might be good refreshers. And then I will, for everybody involved, I will share with you some opportunities for advancing the work at your respective institutions. All right, great. Thank you for sharing this with us. And then the last one for now. I am attending this OER Summit to do what? And this is an open-ended response. Keep your learning journey going, to learn, yes. Network, yes. most certainly will be able to do that throughout the 4 days. Okay. To create your own OER, to incorporate OER into the online courses that you're teaching. Implementing open pedagogy, yep. That's great. See what colleagues are up to, yeah. So a lot of similar some themes I'm noticing here, right? So learning, great. We in higher ed should definitely model that for our students, that we always want to continue learning. Learn tips and tricks, absolutely. Networking, that has come up a few times too, and I appreciate that, because when we can expand communities of practice, we just become much more knowledgeable, much more fruitful in what we do and productive in what we do, and we just simply grow and learn with one another. So this is great. To learn about DEI and OER, that's excellent, and you've certainly come to the right place with it, because when I talk about some of the things that we do at Montgomery College, I will share with you what we do in that particular space. Okay. Well, thank you. Great, great. All right, so we're going to put a pause on the polling for now, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit, or talk with you a little bit about my institution, because I want you to know why we do this work, and like I said earlier, why this is so important for our students, and I think many of you can relate as well. So as Kevin had introduced me, Montgomery College is in Montgomery County, Maryland, and this is actually right outside of Washington, D.C. And so we're very much suburban urban, and we're an open access community college. We've got 4 main campuses. Those first 3 with those acronyms are on physical locations, and then we just added the virtual campus. So I'm the founding dean of the virtual campus. And so we've got 4 main campuses, and we have a lot of satellite campuses as well. And our students, we have about 54,000 credit and non-credit every year, and they come from 165 countries. We've got over 21,000 online student enrollments every year. And one thing about Montgomery County, the county in which we are in, is it's one of the most diverse U.S. counties in the nation. And so we, in fact, just 2 years ago, were recognized as the #1 most diverse community college in the continental United States. And Montgomery College is also the largest community college in the state of Maryland. So all of these fun facts really just to say that with our size and our diversity, the work of open education, the work of social justice, of diversity, equity, and inclusion, all of that is so, so critical because of our students coming from all walks of life. All right. So you've heard a bit about MC. Now, I want you to take a look at this image. And many of you probably have seen it before, and some of you have seen this image, the first 3 columns. You may not have seen the last column. This is a relatively new iteration. But I want you to spend a minute just reflecting on what you see. And then when you're ready, put in the chat just 1 or 2 brief phrases of what you see here. All right. Struggle, barriers removed. Equal, not necessarily equitable. Liberation slide. All right. Equity comes naturally, don't have to think about it. Removing barriers rather than working around them. I'm just reading what's in the chat here. Truth. We have work to do. Yeah. True liberation would be that they would be playing. So David, thank you for mentioning that. I'm going to get to that in a second. So appreciate that comment. And keep the chat going, but just so in a nutshell, I think you all are essentially reflecting on this in a very similar way as I have. So you have reality on the left, right? And then you see the reality is that some people have resources that others do not. And in some cases, there are people who have absolutely no resources at all to be able to engage in whatever it is that they should be engaging in. And then the two in the middle, equality and equity, we recognize that they're not the same thing. And we continue to teach that to many of the people we are in our audiences, because sometimes they're being used interchangeably and they're not the same, as you can see in this image. And then liberation. So there was a comment in the chat saying that liberation in the way it's depicted here is really not truly liberation. You see the barrier has been removed, yes, but they're not actually in the audience on the other side. And that, or even playing the game, right? They're still separated, isolated, so they can see what's going on. They just can't engage. And so there's a little bit of a, going back to what someone has said, more work to be done. So I would be interested to see when this continues, this depiction here, if there's going to be a fifth column and what that fifth column will look like. But as essentially, this right here is one of the many reasons why open education is so important. All right, so I'm going to move on, and I want to now, because of the varying degrees of knowledge that we have here in this virtual space, as we saw from the poll, it's important to level the field. So I'm going to describe what each of these phrases mean, because I will be talking and bringing this up throughout the presentation. So at the top of the diagram is open education, and this is defined as the actual framework of teaching and learning. And it's the framework that is centered on making education more accessible, making it more affordable, more equitable, more inclusive, more innovative, and creates more opportunities for our students to learn effectively. So the work that we all do in the world of open should touch on all of these values. Then in the middle of the diagram, we have open pedagogy, and this includes the strategies of teaching and learning by which educators meet those parameters that were listed at the very top there. Okay, and so some of the strategies of open pedagogy can include things like redesigning your course curriculum or program curriculum to be more inclusive, enhancing student engagement practices so that there's greater opportunities for students to be involved and increase accessibility to your course, incorporating alternative assessments to be more equitable in your testing of your students' subject mastery skills, and also utilizing emerging technologies that are appropriate and innovative and inclusive instead of a hindrance to learning. And then at the very bottom, you see there open educational resources, OERs. And this is located at the bottom of the diagram because it really symbolizes that these are efforts that are delivered at the ground level on the front line of higher ed. And so some of the examples of OERs here are listed at the bottom there. So something like an inclusive syllabus or open textbooks. And you see a lot of other examples as well. So my hope is that by showing you this framework, you have a better understanding of how these three phrases are connected, as I now do, or now talk about the urgency of open education, why it's important. So we all know that college has gotten very expensive, right? And even at community colleges where it's a bit more affordable for many of our students, tuition can still break the bank. And then you add the costs of textbooks and other related educational expenses, and my, oh my, it becomes quite the situation for our students. And in fact, national data have shown that the cost of college has increased by about 25% in the last decade. And yet standard of living and expenses have not necessarily helped with that rise. And so here's a good reason why open education is important. It helps to address the rising costs of education because of the opportunity for us to provide high quality, openly licensed, free course materials to our students so that they can access the course and ultimately be successful. And then in addition to rising costs, we see that college completion rates are still lower than we'd like it to be, especially if our students are competing in the ever-changing, ever-evolving job market. And also national data show that the median time to completion for our bachelor students takes roughly about 52 months, which is a bit more than 4 years. And national data also show that students take up to 6 years to complete their studies at a 2-year institution. Now that's on average, of course. So you see some that are graduating less than that and some graduating more than that. So open education can help here because by making the course materials free and available, you're making the materials accessible and thus you're making their education experience more accessible. So they can access their college education and they reduce their time to completion. We also are no stranger to the declining national student enrollment across the board, right? Many of us are experiencing that. Some are hit harder than most. Four-year institutions, public and especially public four-year institutions, two-year institutions are not immune to this decline. We at Montgomery College are experiencing it as well. And that declining enrollment, it could be correlated with the pandemic. It could be correlated with the rising tuition costs and rising textbook costs and the inability to access their college education. And if that's the case, they're less inclined to enroll in college, at least at a full-time basis. So again, another reason why we need open education to make college more affordable and accessible. And we also see lower student success rates as another contributing factor to a delayed time to completion. So students are failing or they're not passing their classes. Now, whether the reason is because they actually did poorly, or maybe the reason is that they couldn't afford the course materials and they kept falling behind and they're less likely to graduate. And so again, all the more reason why we need open education. And then down to the last two reasons, which is really the bulk of why I'm speaking here today. So we know that as a nation, we've been experiencing a lot with the global public health crisis, but also the social, civic, and political unrests, right? And so combine all of those social forces together, political forces, and it really has disrupted much of our country's education systems, from childcare to kindergarten to college to graduate school. So a summit like yours is all so timely and also perfect because this is how this place is where we learn how to navigate these treacherous waters for our students. So we are going to take a deeper look into social justice and decolonization and what that means in our open education work. So I'm going to ask that you hold off on the decolonizing for a minute because I want to emphasize or talk more about the open pedagogy piece of this. I want to mention the various benefits and important reasons why open pedagogy is critical. So if you recall, open pedagogy is, by definition, the strategies by which we achieve through that framework, the accessibility, affordability, inclusivity, equity, opportunities, right? So things like curriculum redesign and student engagement practices, emerging technologies, those are the strategies we want to be touching on. And so we look at access, we look at engagement, we look at collaboration, we look at success. And when we engage our students in open pedagogy, we're increasing access to education. First, students don't have to wait until their paycheck comes in before purchasing their textbooks. The course materials are freely distributed and they're openly licensed. This again means that they have equitable access to education, and it allows those with money to learn and those without as much money to learn as well. When we practice open pedagogy, we also increase student engagement. Our students become empowered in their learning process because of the innovative and the socially just practices that we incorporate into our classrooms, whether on campus or virtual. So for instance, open educational resources, OERs, that enable us to decolonize the course curriculum, that helps to include everyone's voices rather than just the dominant view that we often hear in traditional proprietary textbooks. The third element is collaboration. Open pedagogy means that we're inviting students to be a part of the teaching process and their learning process. We partner with students to create course materials that are high quality, that are inclusive. We also partner with colleagues to expand our communities of practice and then build off of one another's wealth of knowledge in a free and open way, much like what you all are doing in this space when I asked you, why are you here at this OER Summit? All of this without having to worry about copyright restrictions in the same way as we would with a proprietary textbook or course material. And then last but not least, one of the most important pieces of higher education, success. When students engage in open pedagogy with us, not only are they able to afford their college education, but they can persist and proceed in a timely fashion, which means they decrease the cost of completion and their time to completion. And then all of these elements combined really enable us as educators to create a holistic, student-centered approach to education for all of our students. And I was looking at the lineup of things that you have going on over the next 4 days. And I'm just so pleased and thrilled that you all will be learning so much regarding the technical aspects of OER platforms, the student creation of materials, specifically looking at disciplines and what they're doing in that space, and then that student-led panel that is just the right way to conclude an OER summit. So I'm really excited for all of you. Now I'm going to go back to that to the idea of open pedagogy and why and how it's beneficial and who it's benefiting. And so it's obvious that it's benefiting our students for all the reasons I'd already mentioned, but faculty and staff also benefit for also the reasons that we mentioned. We're all here to learn from one another and to expand our communities of practice. And we can help one another create these transformational learning environments for our students that help to increase student engagement, to increase student motivation, and ultimately improve student success. And then when all of us benefit from it, then the institutions benefit, because institutions that support open pedagogy are probably also the ones who are willing to take risks and put investment behind the innovation and equity-minded approaches to their transformational learning environments. And policymakers and researchers too, and other decision makers really benefit from the work of open education, because when they see that this work is strongly correlated with decreased cost of completion, decreased time to completion, and increased student success rates, they're more likely to want to discuss and pass policies and engage in practices that help support the work in this space. And for example, we've seen, I'm just going to say in California, where the governor approved a $100 million investment in zero-cost degrees in OERs. Or in my state in Maryland, where there is legislation that granted $100,000 for the Maryland Open Source Textbook Initiative with the University System of Maryland to help promote the creation of OER. Or the latest that I'm sure many of you have heard, and if you have not heard, at the end of January of this year, the United States Department of Education put out a call for proposals because it is willing to provide HERF money, which is the Higher Ed Emergency Relief Fund from the pandemic, to higher ed institutions that want to create OER platforms to help meet the basic needs of students. So you can see how they benefit from this work as well. Okay. So now I turn to decolonization, which I mentioned I wanted to put a pause on and then revisit that now. The term decolonizing means that we challenge what we've known for decades, even for centuries. When it comes to higher ed, we are challenging what we've learned and what we've been taught and how we've been taught. We're basically shifting the paradigm here from excluding cultures, numerous cultures, to now including marginalized populations and cultures, and thinking about doing things in a different way and engaging our students and learners in a very different way. Decolonizing means that we're reevaluating the way we were taught. We are reevaluating the materials we used. We are incorporating inclusive approaches in the different avenues of higher ed, like curriculum redesign, as I mentioned earlier, engaging in committee work, making sure that there is all sorts of voices on these committees, even down to the human resource component of higher ed, like hiring and promoting and retaining our employees. All of that comprise the decolonization of higher education. Okay. So now I want to share with you what I believe is a profound statement by Nigerian American feminist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And I will read this verbatim, and I want us to take a moment to reflect on what you're hearing today. Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. When we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place, we regain a kind of paradise. reflect on that for a minute and share in the chat what that statement just meant to you or what it just did to you. Every voice, every story matters greatly. I'm reading what's in the chat here. Everyone has a different story. Stories can bring us together. Yes, wondered why there were so few women scientists and artists. Was told that they didn't exist, only men could do the work, and now we know otherwise. Stories bring life to all with empathy. How do we shift what's valued as scholarship in academia? It's a great question. Well, and this is not to suggest that by bringing in stories, it's not necessarily scholarship, because there's a lot of opportunities for us to create these open educational resources. And we have the expertise to be able to do that. We have the skills to be able to do that. And through summits like this, you'll be able to gain more tools to be able to create this kind of scholarship. Don't judge by just hearing a single story about a person or place. Stories matter. Stories are powerful. Be open, yes. Hashtag own voices, giving people control over the narratives about them. And representation matters for our students, especially. There's a lot of research that points in that direction from the K through 12 to the college settings, that when students can see themselves in the materials that they're learning, it can speak to them, it can increase engagement, it can motivate them, and it can give them a different type of story, one that goes against the traditional way of thinking that many of us probably grew up hearing and believing. Okay, thank you. Keep the chat going. I'm just going to move on to the next slide, but I very much appreciate what you've contributed here so far, so thank you. Now that we've covered the broader concepts of open education and decolonization, I'd like to show you how that's being applied to my institution, and maybe some of this is already happening at yours. If not, these might be some great ideas to start having conversations around. But here's the journey that we've taken at Montgomery College. So at the beginning of our journey, we had open education start in the form of delivering courses that what we call Z courses, which means that textbooks or course materials are zero cost, they're free. And the impetus for us at MC for Z courses actually came from a discussion with our student governance councils who expressed concerns about high textbook costs. And so we listened and we acted on that. And then just quickly through looking at this journey, I'm going to show you slides that really hone in on this. Then we went, took that one notch up and started investigating what impact open pedagogy and OERs had on our student learning. And ultimately, it brings us to where we are today with a lot of social justice programs that I will share with you in just a few minutes. But I wanted to show this to you. So as you see on that slide, we've saved our students over $9 million in textbook savings through our Z courses, our Z programs as well. And so over the years, we've been able to develop 5 Z degrees, 1 Z certificate, and many more are being explored for future delivery. And the Z credentials are listed on this slide, as you can see. And last fall of 2021, we offered about 566 Z course sections with over 10,600 enrollments. And so we're proud that we can offer our students high quality options that allow them to have greater access to their education without the financial obstacle that typically comes in the form of expensive textbooks, as our student governance councils have mentioned to us before. And then we have this. So while college affordability is undoubtedly important for our students and for us, but so is the impact of open education on student learning. I may have mentioned that we are part of an Achieving the Dream school. And so we were fortunate to be a part of an ATD research study several years ago that looked at a number of institutions and the impact that Z courses had and OERs had on student success and student learning. And so although the study had concluded, it was several years ago, we continue to look at our data. And so what we found is that for some of our demographics, student success rates, which are also known as ABC rates in Z courses, were at or above the rates in non-Z courses for some of our demographic populations. And then for many of them, the percentages are comparable, right? And so once we were able to confirm that Z courses were in fact beneficial and not at all harmful to our students, we took our journey to a whole nother level. And that is this level. That higher level is social justice. We wanted to approach open education in a way that directly impacted our communities through our students as agents of change. So over time, we created several innovative programs that were equity-minded, that had inclusive approaches to teaching and learning. So during this presentation, I'm only going to highlight a few, but if you're interested in learning more about what Montgomery College does, I'm happy to share that offline by email or even Twitter. The first one I want to share is what you see here, which is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals Open Pedagogy Faculty Fellowship. A colleague of mine, Dr. Michael Mills, and I created this program after returning from an open education conference in Anaheim back in 2017. And so when we came back, when we realized that open pedagogy and UN SDGs, there was nothing really coupling those two things together worldwide, we decided to create this fellowship. And so the conceptual framework on which this fellowship is based is the set of 17 goals that the United Nations wants us to address by the year 2030, which you see those 17 goals on the left side of the screen. And as you see, these goals are designed to achieve and maintain global justice. And so this fellowship uses open pedagogy to really put the students at the center of their learning process, and it makes them agents of change in their own communities. And we put faculty fellows who are selected in cross-institutional and interdisciplinary teams. So these teams create renewable assignments, which are OERs, and it gets their students to target an SDG to save the world, so to speak, at the risk of sounding cliche. And it gets them to do something in the communities for positive change. And we're now in year 5, and we have a total of 9 2-year and 4-year institutions who are part of our network across North and Central America, Costa Rica being our latest partner. And many more are interested in joining us. One of the highlights I'll share here is that faculty and students partner with one another through presentations as well at the end of their time together. And in fact, one of the showcase is at a conference at the end of this week on Friday at the Arizona Regional OER Conference. So for our students to say that they get to present at a statewide conference, that's a truly big deal to them on top of being involved in this open pedagogy work with us. And then just also, the Montgomery College was awarded the Open Pedagogy Award for Excellence by Open Education Global back in 2020. And we're so humbled to work with the faculty and students who made this recognition possible. I'm going to share with you now another one. And this one is relatively brand new. And this is a good example of the intersection of open education and decolonization. This is newly launched. So we just started, we had months of planning, but it just started this January. And what this does, it gets our faculty and students to work in pairs to decolonize the course curriculum through a collaborative redesign of their courses. So they work together to create these inclusive reading materials, inclusive syllabus, redesigning their assessments, group activities, and it truly puts the student voices front and center of a course curriculum. And then at the end of this semester, we'll have our first showcase with this cohort. So I'm really excited to see what they produced this semester long. Another thing I'll talk to you real quick is badging. So we do a great deal of badging at Montgomery College, and many of you probably are familiar with this, but if not, so badging is a subset of micro-credentials, and it's essentially a digital award to the recipient for achieving a specific set of skills or competencies. And then micro-credentials are like the larger umbrella of badges. So these badges are stacked up to a larger set of competencies. So at MC, we offer a number of badges that are related to social justice, like the ones that you see here, and they're coming from different angles. And a colleague of mine, whose office is just down the hall, she's actually in the process of creating and leading the effort to create an OER micro-credential that will consist of 3 individual badges. So I'm really excited to see how this will pan out and how it will benefit our faculty and our students. Now that you got a sense of some of the things that we do at Montgomery College in the open education, social justice, and decolonization space, I want to talk about ways in which we all can get involved together. And for some of you, you probably are already doing this, and for others, you may not yet, and you are probably wondering, well, how do I get involved? And it can start at any level. When I present this to you, there is no priority list. This is really just a list, and you see where you can leverage yourself at your institution. So one way to get involved and to make the open education work more prominent at your institution, I would say, is to have the work be aligned with institutional strategic plans and priorities. So what you see here are the logos of our institutional strategic plans, just so that you have a visual. We have our MC 2025 and MC 2020, which was the old one. We have our Middle States self-study report. Middle States is our accrediting body. We have our Achieving the Dream student success vision statement, and then we have our academic affairs master plan. The work of open and transformation is sprinkled throughout these documents, because I think I'm sure we all believe that if we're all aligned, then we're more likely to gain resources, to gain support, to gain what is needed to make the work advance at our institutions. Another way that one could get involved, or an institution could get involved, is to create a formal infrastructure to support the work and to support the people who are doing the work, to help us to be effective in our diversity, equity, and inclusion work as it comes in through the open education piece. What you see here is Montgomery College's formal infrastructure for open education, and we call it MC Open. We were able to create this through the Achieving the Dream grant I mentioned earlier. If you can create an infrastructure, it is much easier to share the open education work across your institution and across other institutions, and provide the relevant training and encourage networking in this space. And this is actually not as costly as it may seem. If you're able to do something like this, this is a place where you can house a well-developed professional development hub or spot for that networking and that expanding the community of practice that we were talking about earlier. Another way to get involved, and again, many of you are probably already doing this, collaborate across your institution, collaborate internally, try to involve all of these players, these stakeholders in the open education space. When I had that poll that asked, what is your official role? There were a lot of librarians here, a lot of faculty members here, a lot of administrators here. And that's exactly what we need to see. We need to see all of these players and then some. And I'm sure there are more that I did not put on this slide, but all of these individual groups together can help us bridge boundaries. It can connect us with the various offices within our institution. It can help us collaborate with these diverse stakeholders in a more systematic way. And when all of that can be achieved, this holistic approach of student success can also be easily achieved. Everyone can be a leader from where they sit. It isn't about a title. It's about where we can work together and how we can work together. And so that is the key here, to be able to leverage our influence at our respective institution. Speaking of collaboration, external collaboration is also important. Next on my list here. Here are, again, just some of the examples of ways in which we at Montgomery College have externally collaborated. So I mentioned that we are an ATD school. I mentioned that we go to open ed conferences and we take what we gather from there, we try to bring it back to our institution and do something about what we learned. Open Education Global, I mentioned that the award that we got for the United Nations Fellowship came from OE Global. We work with CCC OER. In fact, I am Vice President of the Professional Development on the Executive Council of CCC OER. So we do a lot of great work across the country in that space. And in fact, Housatonic Community College in Connecticut is also a member of this CCC OER. So I work with the individual representation there. Social media also is a great way to spread the word and collaborate. Just like I said here, here's my Twitter handle. Feel free to go out and tweet this live so that we can find ways to continue that external collaboration more than probably what is already happening. And so there are many more ways to collaborate. This, again, like I said, is just a snippet of how we at Montgomery College have collaborated on the open education piece. And then just a couple more things. Again, this is the exact same table that I showed you earlier, but the reason why I'm doing this again or showing this again is the other way to get involved is to share your data. Get to know your data, find out what the institutional information looks like, the data on student success rates, and then use that to help advance the work, let the numbers speak for themselves. And when people get to see the data and they can understand also the stories behind the data, you want to get stories too, you're more likely to receive that support necessary to launch and advance the open education work. And then over time, you'll be able to scale and sustain the open education work at your institution. Now, I bring you to my last polling question. I did say we were only putting a pause on the polls. So I'm going to ask you to go back to Mentimeter, menti.com, and then use this code again, 7230-8219, and answer this question for me. And again, if you don't have Menti, you can just put it in the chat and I can read from there. What do you anticipate doing with information you learn from this 4-day OER summit? Good. Providing resources to faculty, implement into your OER classes. Good. Incorporate into your teaching, greater collaboration with faculty. Look for more OER for students. Share with your PD team, exactly. Support your faculty. Apply with the OER initiative at your institution, yes. Get back in touch with instructional tech librarians. There's that internal collaboration, great. Implement OER, awareness, yeah. Open pedagogy at your institution, yeah. You're building a justice studies program and want to share this information with your electronic learning committee, excellent. OER DEI into social justice, criminal justice classes, wonderful. Working on more inclusivity. So you see the themes, right? So most definitely you've come to the right place to be able to achieve these goals. And like I said earlier, I'm so excited and thrilled for you at the lineup that has been put in place for you. So I hope that throughout the week, you reflect on the opportunities that lie before you at the summit. Connect with one another, learn from one another, be open to innovation, as many of you have already expressed in your chat and on the polls. Reflect on what this event means to you, and then reflect on what the community means to you. And then at the end of the day, every day, reflect on your purpose in higher ed. So that concludes my presentation. I thank you so much for having me in your space, and I am now going to turn it over to Kevin.
Thank you so much. And Shanta, if you've still got time, we do have a couple questions that did get queued up. And I'll take this moment to also encourage folks, if you do have questions, please add those into the chat at this point in time. But Shanta, I think going back to where you're talking about your social justice ambassadors program, I think there was one of the questions that was, how do you get students to participate in this program?
We were fortunate that there were 2 grants that we received to get this launched. So we had an internal grant at Montgomery College, which was a modicum amount, but that's really all we needed. And then we had a statewide Maryland grant. So we actually have 2 parallel programs happening. And I just didn't mention the other one. I mentioned the internal grant. But we are able to give our students a stipend for their work this semester.
Great. There was another question that was related to the badging program, and the question was really about how the badges were awarded or earned.
Great question. So we put or we build a set of competencies for each of those badges. We have a committee take a look at those competencies to ensure there is a rigor in place, because we don't want to simply just give away badges. We want them to be truly deservingly earned. And so in many cases, for instance, badges for students, they go through a course and they then have to complete a couple of additional activities as dictated by that competency list. And if they are able to successfully finish those, then they are awarded the digital badge. And same thing with faculty and staff who earn these badges. They go through a program or a course or a training, but they also have to do some additional things as outlined in the competencies, and then they get the badge.
Great. And the last question we have up to date is for the student-faculty collaborations, I'm assuming reference to open pedagogy, are the students compensated in any way for their time?
And if this is the United Nations fellowship, I'm assuming that's what we're referring to. The answer is no, the students are not compensated financially for their time, because this is a part of the course. So the faculty member is involved in this fellowship. They are selected through a competitive process. They create these assignments with their faculty partner from another institution, another discipline. And then these assignments are deployed in their classes that following fall semester. So students initially think, oh, this is just a regular assignment, just like any class, until they are briefed that this is actually part of a larger international collaboration. They get so excited because they get to be a part of a bigger picture. But one of the ways in which we treat them or reward them, not necessarily not compensation in terms of finances, but that showcase that we put on at the end, or other conference opportunities that we have our students engage in, those are excellent things that they can put on their resume as they think about transferring out of our institution and into a 4-year institution.
Great. So I have one question for you in absence of some others from the audience. You've presented a lot of great information, some great strategies, initiatives that are happening within your home state. With everything that has been shared today, if there was one item that folks could take away and make sure that they remembered, what would be that one point that you would stress everybody to walk away from this session with?
The one thing the biggest takeaway that I think every single person who's tuning in today can walk away with is, this can be done no matter your position, no matter your role at the institution. A lot of the programs that I talked about might seem ambitious, might seem grandiose, might seem like you need some funding, but a lot of this stuff can happen right at the ground level, no matter whether you're a faculty member, a librarian, a dean. We can do this work together. And so one of the best ways to do that is to listen to our students, which I think you all are going to be doing at the end of this week. Listen to your students, listen to their voices, listen to what they want and what they need. And at the same time, we have to be willing to hear that. We have to be willing to hear whatever it is that they say they want and need, which might go against some of the traditional approaches we've been trained to teach and the ways we've been educated. So listen to the voices, and then from there, you can come up with innovative ways to partner with students to get them be a part of their learning process. And from there, you can transform your whole teaching environment, and voila, magic can happen.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today and really kicking off our Connecticut OER Summit. For folks, I really appreciate you joining us today, but I hope you'll come back tomorrow. Clint Lalonde from BC Campus will be talking about open platforms, things that support open production as well as collaboration. So I hope you come back each day at 12 p.m. Eastern. And Dr. Hernandez, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.